you're not supposed to look back at your first draft and hate it completely. You're supposed to say, yeah, like I started, I got something done, and then I adjust it. And like that's how we learn. But there's still the process of accepting your own mistakes, even when you are doing something well and having success and heading in the right direction. I think you need a level of criticism to be able to move forward and grow, but you also need to be able to be where you are and also have an understanding of the biggest thing that you can do really in my uh, belief is to move forward no matter what. You keep moving forward, and as long as you are growing and learning and understanding the mistakes you made, I think you're going to be okay. There's a quote I have on my board right here, which is just all you got to do is not stop, which I really believe in. Like, it's not about always hustling. It's not always about feeling motivated, crushing it, and doing everything right. It's just keep moving. As long as you keep moving, you are going to get better.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the life stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Before we get into today's conversation with Tyler Mowery, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave us a positive rating and review. Share this episode with a friend and subscribe to the show. We have brand new interviews every single Monday, and a brand new takeaways episode is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And now, without further ado, I'm very excited to present to you my conversation with Tyler Mowery. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Tyler Mowery. Tyler's a YouTuber whose channel is closing in on 200,000 subscribers. He's sitting at, I believe, 192,000 at the moment. His channel is all about teasing out practical screenwriting tips and lessons from your favorite movies. On top of that, he's the creator of the course Practical Screenwriting. And as someone who loves the world of social media and screenwriting, I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today to talk about both those things. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this stuff with you.
Dude, I'm excited to have you here. And where I want to start, I want to go all the way back to the beginning today. So correct me if I'm wrong, but were you born in Cleveland, Tennessee?
Yes, I was. Wow. Where'd you find that? Is that on my Facebook or something?
No, I didn't check your Facebook. I probably went deep on Instagram if I was going to pull that from somewhere. And I'm
Oh, gotcha.
assuming where I got that.
Probably.
So, so in relation to like Chattanooga, how far away is that?
It's 20 minutes. I mean, like most of my life was in Chattanooga. So I went to school there. My dad worked there. Like all my friends were there. So it was more kind of like Cleveland was a suburb of Chattanooga, and I would drive there for a lot of stuff.
Got you. Okay. So then talk to me a little bit about growing up in Chattanooga, in Cleveland. What were you like as a kid growing up? Like, did you know that movies was something that you were always passionate about? Like, what was some of your interests as a kid?
Yeah. So I remember when I was younger, I wasn't really focused on screenwriting or movies. There were some movies I liked, but what I was really doing was I was reading books. So when I was a kid, I was reading a lot. So I was like, there was this local library in Cleveland that my mom would take me and my sisters to like once a week. And I would check out something like 6 or 7 books from there. I think they had like a limit you could check out, read all of those in about a week, come back and grab new ones. So I remember specifically there was one summer where um, we moved into this new neighborhood temporarily, and it was essentially just full of old people, and there was nothing to do. And so I was just running through books, like 600-page books in like 3 or 4 days. Like I was just clearing through these things, and I was reading fantasy novels, I was reading sci-fi stuff, I was reading post-apocalyptic stuff, I was reading detective novel, like all this sort of stuff. And that is really where I started saying like I want to be a novelist. That was kind of where I started, and then that point it kind of developed over time into, oh, I want to do animation for animated film, so I want to do this, and then it slowly kind of became screenwriting.
So with that animated films early on, were you doing anything as a kid to learn animation or anything like that? Like, how did you get from there to screenwriting?
Yeah, so there was a I forget what it's called, but Adobe has a 2D like Illustrator animator program. I forget what it's called. um
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, but I can't think of what it is.
I can't remember. I don't know if it's not Illustrator, is it? I don't remember, but I think I still have it on my computer. I have to look, but I made like a couple animations. One of them I kept was just like little kind of stick figures doing things, like these little kind of animated shorts, like 10 seconds long and this sort of thing. And that kind of taught me about frames per second, and that taught me about kind of like framing and that sort of thing. Then I graduated into Blender, which was a 3D animation software. I don't know if you've heard of it. And that was really the point where I realized that animation wasn't for me because the learning curve on Blender. I was also 12 or whatever, 12 or 13 or something. But I remember getting into Blender and it was just like the hardest thing. And I wanted to be immediately good at it and I wasn't. And so I got bored of it, which is kind of interesting because I think if I kind of knew what I did now, there's a world where I would have stuck with it because it just takes time to get better at things. But yeah, so then I was doing Blender, and then from there I hit high school, and high school was kind of where I left storytelling for a bit. Like I was just kind of doing nothing, I guess, in high school. I was reading a little bit. I was doing certain things here and there, but in high school, I guess I wasn't doing anything because I started watching YouTube in high school. And so I started following YouTubers. And then near the end of high school was when I started finding like people doing, filmmaking or early on video essays, people just talking about films, film review channels, that sort of thing. And then entering into college was when I really made the switch of like, I'm doing screenwriting, I'm doing filmmaking, and that was the real sort of decision point, I think. Yeah, so, you really did your research. So I went to Liberty University, which was a very interesting place to go to school, and, which honestly, I don't regret at all. I think I had a really unique college experience, that I was fortunate about because a lot of people didn't get just kind of the wackiness that I kinda experienced, especially going to Liberty in, like, the Trump era and all of that. It was a wild time. But I went to Liberty, and then the way they structure their film program was your second 2 years, so junior and senior year, you're doing nothing but film school, and then your first 2 years, you're only doing gen eds, and then like some, or entry level film school classes. Which when I was coming in, I loved the idea of that because it meant that I get all the crap done, and then I'm just doing filmmaking, just doing that. So I spent the first 2 years. Well, I'll back up a little bit. When I got there, I was kind of like doing nothing, like I was doing nothing in high school, and I kind of came to college to do the same thing, doing nothing. I did that for a few months. And then I remember having this kind of moment of like, man, like I really need to decide like what I want to do with my life seriously. And I really need to, if I'm going to do this whole directing, screenwriting, film thing, I need to like start doing some things. And so that was actually what launched the YouTube channel because I was already watching channels like Every Frame of Painting at the point. And I told myself, okay, I'm going to make a video a week about something that I can, look at a movie that I like, analyze it, study some things that I find interesting about it, and I could use that to one, get projects done, get used to deadlines, get used to projects, and at the same time, learn about this thing that I like, which was filmmaking. And so, if you look at my earlier videos, they're not about screenwriting only. They're about cinematography, they're about color grading, they're about framing, they're about editing, they're about all these different elements because I was interested heavily in all of it.
I'm curious what drew you to screenwriting and movies specifically. If you grew up reading books, I'm surprised. Like, why didn't you get drawn to being an author and writing novels? Why did you gravitate towards film and screenwriting?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest version is because I wanted to make money and I wanted to make an impact. So I think the reality is, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but my generation and the generations behind me, they're not reading books. I mean, maybe there's one or two popular novels every couple years that get passed around, like Gone Girl or something like that. But like largely, people are not. There are not novels that are sitting in the cultural psyche in the same way that films and TV shows do. And so I came into it really just having some pragmatism in that sense of just like, well, I don't like books, I like storytelling. And I really, that was a big thing for me, was separating that medium from the thing itself, which was storytelling. And I think that is also part of the what has been my strength in regards to looking at screenwriting, because so many people get lost in the medium of it and they forget about story, and they look at certain concepts, or they look at certain writer directors, and they get lost in what a story is, and they get confused for a film versus the story in that film and what the difference is. And so that's really why I decided to go the screenwriting film route, because people aren't reading books like they were 30 years ago or 40 years ago.
On that same theme of how people don't read books anymore, I'm curious your thoughts around, we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but around the movie industry itself, with just the way people are consuming. People are either one looking for longer than a movie with a show they can binge, or way shorter than a movie and like a 30-second TikTok. So, as someone who's wanting to go into film, do you have any concerns about the industry itself getting smaller as consumers' habits change as to how they consume content?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Honestly, one of the one of the biggest stressors that I have is the idea that this industry of movie making is such a weird industry. And not only is it a weird industry outside of our current sort of COVID world, but now you add on this COVID world to it, to an industry that requires large groups of people being together for long periods of time to create something, as well as huge amounts of money. And so, like, the film industry, I think, is a, I don't know. It has its pros and cons, because like there's a part of me that would love to sit in my room and write a novel and send that out, and people love it, and have an audience, and have people really be impacted by that story. Um, and then there's just the chaos and also fun of the film industry, and this just like huge organism with all these moving parts and all these different um, objectives. People have different goals, and there's all this push pull, and there's this whole like just sort of the politics of, not like national politics, but just like the politics of getting a movie made. There's all this stuff, and some of that's fun, and some of it is very obnoxious. And so, I think you just kind of, you have to pick what battle you're gonna fight, essentially.
And speaking of the fact that movie is such a collaborative experience, and there's so many different like sub career paths essentially within filmmaking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's part of the reason why you ended up dropping out of film school, right? Because they weren't really focusing on the screenwriting component of putting the movie together.
Yeah. So there were a few reasons that I ended up leaving. Um, And one of them was, yeah, a heavy focus on the production side and not as heavy of a focus on the story side. So there was a lot of people that I was friends with who stayed and continued, and that wanted to be editors, wanted to work on set, wanted to work in some of these more production based jobs, and they probably made the right choice to stay and do that. Because of the experience that they got. I knew that for me, I was not getting the writing and storytelling focus that I wanted, and therefore made the choice to leave. And so, um, that was part of it. Um, and it's funny because I think that so much of their program, honestly, has so much potential to be a fantastic program. I think that there were just a few things that, sort of on the objective level, like what the film school's goals were kind of not aligned correctly, and that's kind of what created some problems. The school ended up being more so, it wasn't to create the best possible filmmakers. I'll just say that. And I think in a world that film school was solely there to create the best possible filmmakers, um, that they could have had, and still to this day could have, a fantastic program.
I don't remember where I heard you say this, but you were saying how some people finish film school as screenwriters with only one short film kind of, they're a short film script to their name. Like they don't have a feature written. Is that true? Because that like blew my mind. Because so for context for you, I started screenwriting in February, and by June I'd written three first drafts of three separate scripts, and I just finished like I scrapped one when I went through rewriting it, and then I just kind of finished to the point where I'm going to let people start reading them. My first official script yesterday, and I've done that in a matter of like 5 6 months. But like it just boggles my mind when I heard you say that people go through 4 years of film school and come out the other side with one short film script and nothing. Like is that actually real?
Yeah, I mean, you are an outlier, and I think first off, congratulations for writing so much so quickly. Like, if you can keep that up, and at the same time also be looking for, what are your blind spots and what are your strengths in writing. Like, you could go very quickly because the biggest problem I see with writers, especially in film school, is not that they don't have an understanding of story theory or story concepts, but that they constantly procrastinate on writing that first story. So, I mean, yeah, there were people that graduated the program, that were still, pre their first screenplay that talked about wanting to be writers and these. And part of the reason that I started my course was because I realized that it wasn't just my film school; that there were film schools all over the place that were just focused on the production side, or were focused so heavily on theory or film history, or essentially were doing anything except helping writers get stories out. And so I really felt like when I was, and I obviously still, I'm not saying I'm done learning, but when I was very in the beginning and starting, the most I learned was writing drafts and just getting a draft out, getting a draft out, getting a draft out, and being like, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? Right? That is what helped me grow. And so the amount of procrastination that happens before that first story is just immense, and the reason it is because it is difficult to write 100 pages of something, and so many writers have this idea or they have this thing they want to say, and they want this first screenplay they ever write to be like their magnum opus, and they don't realize that what they're doing is starting a process of learning something. And so I think that you really can't, in my mind, you really can't decide whether or not you like screenwriting until you've written at least one draft of something, right? Until you've really got into it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it was one because, like, so more context for you is that I always grew up saying I wanted to be a screenwriter, but never actually pursued that. And so it was coming into 2021. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. If I hate it, I hate it. And then I did those three, and I've been hooked ever since. But I'm curious for you, when you ended up making that decision to drop out of film school, was that like a moment of crisis or inner conflict for yourself because like this is what you thought you wanted to do and now you're dropping out of the school to get there? Or did you know that through the amount you'd been learning by doing these YouTube videos every single week that there were ways of getting into the industry without actually graduating film school?
So I was definitely worried about the decision. Like, so up to that point, I, that decision was a real life shift decision that had impact on what happened next in a way that hadn't happened before. So, when I was younger and going from middle school to high school is just sort of what you do, and then going from high school into college is sort of what you do, and then you pick a major and ideally you stick with it and that's what you do. And when I was nearing the end of school, and my options were finish a film degree or get essentially a hodgepodge degree that didn't matter, which is what I have now. I have an interdisciplinary degree, which essentially means nothing. So, um, making that decision was very much me saying, I feel like I can do this better than the current path that's been laid out for me. And that was a pivotal decision for sure, because it was this was me trusting myself to make a decision based upon my future, that, and it really was too me saying that I know better than these people that are trying to teach me. And that was a element of it too, which was like there was a sense of that I was being, arrogant by talking with professors about what I felt was wrong, or trying to leave. there was kind of a bit of a conflict there. And and it made sense because I was just some kid saying that I know better than you, and there's like some audacity that comes with that. Like, how can you say that? And then what happened right after that was I started um, just emailing people, trying to get an internship out in LA, and or trying to get anything out in LA. And I did, ended up getting something for myself. I ended up becoming a script reader. And that was, by my own volition. And when I got that and I went through that experience, that's when I realized, like, okay, I might know better than people that are telling me what the path is, because that was a very clear. I would not have been able to do that, what I like the job that I had in Los Angeles had I stayed in the program, because I would have been so busy with other things. I would not have been sending out as many emails and all this stuff that I've been trying to get to. So yeah, I mean, to a long answer to your question, but absolutely, it was a very pivotal moment, because it was saying, "Do I know better than the people around me about what should happen next in my future? And do I have the ability to take the responsibility for that if it goes poorly?" And yeah.
And so where does that self-belief come from then? To know that you know better? Is it from just a combination of like the learning you were doing on your own? Was it I know you shot a short film, I believe it was in college called Gone, and you did the whole thing like 48 hours. Is it from doing projects like that and seeing the results and realizing that you're just learning more by doing all this stuff outside of school? Is that where you get that belief to have the confidence in yourself to know you know more and then to make that decision to leave?
That's a really fantastic question, and this is something I've thought about a lot myself, which is the idea of why do why do certain people, have this belief that they know better, or why do certain people act on that potential idea and other people don't? Um, and I don't know. It's hard to know. I think some of it is based in how you are raised, or I think some of it's sort of parental, some environmental. Some of it has to be potentially genetic. I honestly don't know, but the core of it is I have always truly believed I was smart and I could figure things out. Like, I don't remember a single time, even when I was a kid, that I didn't think I was a smart person and I didn't think that I could figure things out. I've always kind of been stubborn in that way. And really, it kind of became testing whether or not that was a real thing, or whether I was, just an arrogant loser. Um, and trying to figure out, because the way you figure that out is by actually, pushing into the world and seeing what happens. So I really don't know.
I think what's interesting. So I just recorded an interview a couple days ago, and the guy kind of broke down. His name's Patrice Renee. He plays football for Rutgers, and he was saying the difference between confidence and arrogance is that when you're confident, because you have the work to back it up, and you've been doing the work, and that my assumption is because you've done the work, it gave you that confidence, as opposed to just being someone who sat back and did nothing and assumed they were better. You knew you were better because you're actually putting that work in. With the YouTube and the short films you were doing, and I kind of want to dive a little bit more into kind of the early days of your YouTube channel. So bring me back to March 29th, 2016, when you hit upload for the first time on a video. How are you feeling? What's kind of going through your mind? Like, what are your hopes for the channel? Like, do you think this is going to be huge? Is being an influencer something that's on your mind, or are you just doing it to learn? Like, kind of what's going through your mind as you hit publish on that first video?
Yeah. So, couple things. I mean, one, n- the the focus of the channel, I think, from the beginning, was this was going to be a tool that I could use to learn. So I think, because I essentially did that and for two reasons. One, to say if this thing failed to get, catch on, I that's kind of an ego save there. And then two, genuinely, like, I wanted this to be something that was valuable to me, not like, even if it didn't go anywhere. So the idea that this was something to, like, work on my own consistency, work on my own work ethic, work on my understanding of film concepts. Like, even if it got 10 subscribers for the entire time I did this channel, like, that was important. So But at the same time, the second I hit upload, I'm thinking about how awesome it's going to be when my channel hits 5 million subscribers. Like the idea that it's always funny to me, YouTubers talking about like, oh, I started and I never dreamed about hitting a million subscribers. It's like, I thought about hitting 10 million the first day I ever uploaded. Like that's always so surprising. Like, of course, you're thinking about how cool would it be if this is a massive success. So that was kind of where it started, and I think that I think that mindset of this was something I was using to learn and using to build my work ethic really helped me get through what essentially became a year under 1,000 subscribers.
Was it that first year, I believe, where you almost deleted your channel because of
Mhm.
lessons from the screenplay?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's another podcast I spoke on like a little while ago. He's talking about like just this time, like the specific time going to 1,000 subscribers, and um, in I can't remember, but yeah, it was something like 6-ish, maybe 10-ish months into my channel. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But I was running this channel and I was on r/screenwriting on Reddit a lot because I was trying to get a video to take off there. And now they hate me over there for some reason. But trying to get a video to take off over there, and I saw this new video from this new channel, Lessons from the Screenplay. I click on this video, and I'm watching it, and it's fantastic, great video, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, and I see that it has something like 10,000 views or something, like nothing crazy, but like a substantial amount of views for it. And I click over and I'm like, oh, this is this guy's first video. And the channel had something like 1,000 subscribers, I think it was, like when I checked. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy put up his first video. It got over 10,000 views. He got 1,000 subscribers in the first day. Like, that's crazy. And I was like, well, that's cool. This is a great video. And I was a little bit like, oh, I wish I would could have something like that. But I was like, whatever. I go to sleep and I wake up the next day and I check his channel, and the video has something either at or over 100,000 views, and his channel had over 10,000 subscribers, and I was crushed by it. Like, I just was like, I really had a moment of wanting to just be done and delete this thing and call it done because I'd spent so much time with really no results on the views and subscribers point, and here comes this guy dropping a video and just hitting it immediately, and I was like, well, I guess I'm terrible at this. Um, and I ended up not ending it, and I think really why I didn't end up ending it was because I sort of came back to why I was doing this channel initially, which was this is my way of learning and my way of building my own work ethic, and so I continued pushing forward.
And so how long did it take you to go from, "I'm just gonna delete my channel," to, "No, I have to keep going"? Because I know there's a period in between there where you're, like, laying on your bed in your dorm room, like, just contemplating life essentially. So how long did it take you to kinda get from, "This is stupid, I'm done," to, "No, I have to keep going"?
Honestly, I don't think it was too long. Like maybe it was a few days, maybe it was a week. I can't quite remember. I do remember though being like going through the motions. I think on the next few videos, just because like I wasn't. I don't think my heart wasn't in it at the time, but I was like, I'm going to continue making these for now. And honestly, I think that was really valuable. And I think that one of the things I've really learned is there are always moments where you don't want to be doing the thing that you spent all this time doing. But you have to really remember why you want to do this thing at all. And I think that's a big thing too, is the second you lose why you're doing something, you aren't going to be able to hold up any habits or any consistency that you've built up so far. And so even coming into something, having a very clear understanding of why this is important to you and why, even if this thing fails, that it will be a valuable experience for you. I think that's really important. And so I kept pushing.
And I believe it was shortly after that, you posted, I think it was your Shutter Island video, which is now your most viewed video. You posted that r/screenwriting, and that popped a little bit, right? I think you put up 1,000 subs in a day or something like that because of that video.
Yeah, yeah. So that video was my first, like, well, actually, one video before that one was I did this theory of everything video, which was like a cinematography analysis of this one particular scene in theory of everything. And I put it on r/slash screenwriting. It got like 3,000 views. And this was when my videos were getting like maybe 100 views. And I was like, this is it, this is going to be this is the start of the run. Like, all exponential growth from here. And what that essentially became was a nice little dip up, and then I got some subscribers, I got some more views, but it just kind of went along. And then my first real, like, okay, like maybe I can really get some traction, was my Shutter Island video. I put it up on Reddit. I remember put it up on Reddit. I think I was around, I can't remember how many subscribers, maybe just over 1,000. But I put it up on Reddit, and I went to go hang out at a friend's house or something. And I remember checking my YouTube Studio app on my phone, and the video had like 36,000 views. And I was like, oh my God, like I had a hit, like I had one. And I remember, like, I woke up the next day and the video was at like 70,000 or something. Like it kept running for a little bit. And I was like, that was very motivating because I was like, I had one hit, I had one that worked, and that it really did kind of validate all of the work that I had done up to that point, because it was like, this is working. Keep pushing. This is working. I think that really was the signifier of sort of phase two of my channel. And I think like phase two would probably be that video up to like 17,000 subscribers. Because that really was like, people will watch this channel. I can, have videos do well. And after that video, now I was having videos do 2, 3, 4,000 views consistently every time. I had an audience base. It wasn't huge, but people were watching this. Actual people were coming in, watching this. And so it made it so much easier to start pushing, 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 pushing. And so the most difficult part is always just when you have zero results, right? When you are just in the absolute thick of the thing, no results, nothing is working. That's when it's hardest. The second you get some success, some positive feedback from this thing, that's really, I think, where the snowball can start, because that pulled my kind of motivation back into it, like, heavier, which, like, this is working. This is working.
For sure. I think that's just an important thing for people to hear. Like, if you'd given up when you first saw Lessons from the Screenplay, you never would have had that video pop off on r/screen. You know what I mean? Like, it's all it takes is one video for the direction of your channel to completely change. I think that's a really important thing for people to hear. And you mentioned too how that was kind of phase two was from around the 2K to 17K mark. I also read somewhere, it might have been in another podcast you mentioned, where you said that you kind of took a lot of breaks from your YouTube because you were working on screenwriting and different things like that. Was that during the first phase, trying to get to 1,000, where you were discouraged, or when you were taking breaks, was that kind of the second phase, 2 to 17K?
I was pushing, once I had that Shutter Island video, I was doing my YouTube channel. So, like, initially I was pushing, I was making videos consistent, consistent, consistent. When I had that initial success, that really was where I had a little bit even more of a shift into focusing on this thing as, like, okay, this is going to be like an engine that I can use. And so I really started pushing harder on that. And I really started working on making better videos. Really started trying to grow consistently. And so, um, from about 2017 or so, I was, like, most of that I was making videos, and then I think what happened was, um, around end of 2017-ish, kind of end of 2018. This is when I started, like, making less, and then I took kind of a hiatus because I was writing and I was also making short films that were taking up a ton of my time now. So, there's a, you mentioned Gone. There's, I think, there's like 3 other ones that I don't even know, like, if you can find them on the internet. And there's one that's like, I did this big one that was this contained thriller short film that was a 20 pager. It was the biggest project I had done. and it never ended up getting fully edited. I should have had someone else other than me edit it because I spent all this time working on it and paying for it and directing it and getting all these people to work on it. And I remember getting in the edit and just kind of being discouraged about what I had. And it's possible that what it could have ended up being okay, but that first pass of an edit is always painful, and I couldn't get through. I should have hired somebody to do it, but at the time I had just no money at all. So these are some of the reasons. And then also I came to LA and I was being a script reader. And so and I was trying to write a script for the production company that I was working at because they um, allowed, well, yeah. But so I was doing a lot of other stuff and I was trying to push into the industry. And then I returned to my channel when I realized that I didn't want to be, I wanted to, I felt like I had something of value to tell other people. And I really felt like my experience in film school could have been so much better. And it wasn't, and I felt that a lot of other people's was also not fantastic. And I didn't want to be running off of like entry level LA jobs until somebody read my screenplay and this sort of thing. And I was like, well, I have this channel and I really have like so much stuff that I feel like I can contribute here. And so I focused back on the channel, and the idea being that I would screenwrite and I would do this YouTube channel and I would sort of come at the film industry at sort of this sort of outsider zone versus trying to work my way up through assistant jobs or production assistant jobs. Not that there's anything wrong with doing that route, but I didn't feel like it was something that I wanted to do after my experience in LA.
That's fair. I do want to talk a little bit more about your experience in LA though. And just to confirm, so some of those other short films you worked on, one was A New Beginning, another one was Drift, right? And are either of those two the ones you were the one that never finished?
So, A New Beginning was a movie I wrote with another guy I went to school with. His name is Eric Lauer. He is super cool dude. Um, and but those aren't the ones I'm talking about. So neither of those projects were stuff that I had. I wrote, of course, on New Beginning, and then on Drift, I was doing like ADing and like just kind of production work, helping a friend out. So like that wasn't really my project. But there were a couple other projects that were m- my kind of spearheading it that either I deleted off YouTube, or didn't make it out of post. So,
And so at what point do you think like how far in your career do you want to be before you throw back and bring those videos and release those videos? Are they never seeing the light of day ever?
um, I mean, maybe I'll bring them back, um, in the future. I think that the only reason I would bring them back would just be to show, hey, you know how like you think writing an ambiguous script about a guy who has dreams or whatever is cool. Actually, it's not, and everybody just like you is making the same mistake. And here's where I did it too, right? So that's probably why I would try to bring something like that back. Um, and I've also thought about like shorts to make, kind of in the future. Like, I like the idea of making a short and doing with an actual professional budget, and actually hiring because everything I did back in college was just kind of low, like sub $1,000 shoots. People are volunteering and I'm paying for very small things and this sort of thing. But yeah, I think, and I haven't made a short up to this point because I would want it to be something that would be trying to take to a festival. And to do that, I'd want a particular feature behind it. And so the stuff that I have now is not, at least at this point, that as in the route that I've decided to pursue. So, because making a professional short can be expensive, of course, and there's a whole process to that. And so I'm going other avenues rather than that one for now.
Mm. And so the other interesting thing I wanted to ask you about was being a screenwriter, or sorry, a screen reader, and that was
Mhm.
was that for Voltage? That was
Yeah, it was.
that one. So talk to me about some of the things you learned being a reader, because so I had Michael Haig on the podcast probably a couple months ago now. So he was, for anyone listening, Will Smith's script. He was on retainer with Will Smith's company for many years, and he started out being a reader. And he said he just learned so many things through reading unproduced screenplays. So I'm curious, what are some of those things that you learned getting the chance, especially so early in your career, to get your hands on a bunch of unproduced screenplays, and what you learned from them?
Mhm. Yeah, so one of the biggest things it was kinda sizing up my competition, right? Of coming in and saying, "Alright, like, how how well are these writers writing? People with agents and managers and that are getting real considers by production companies, what am I up against?" And I this shouldn't sound arrogant because I think if you ask a lot of readers or a lot of producers, they will say similar things, which is most of what I read was surprisingly bad. Um, and I think I really watched. That part of it was I was honestly confused. I mean, I read so many scripts over the course of working there, and I started to kind of see just the same mistakes again and again. Writers are making the same mistakes, the same mistakes, the same mistakes, and I was like starting to think about, okay, what really is wrong here? What is the real reason that these aren't working? Because I found that a lot of script readers or script feedback services or these sorts of things would just kind of try to shift the idea of the story or say, what if you did this version of the idea? And that's not the same as saying, okay, what in this story, in this writer's vision, is not working. And so that really helped me learn more about the craft of looking at something that is finished and being able to clearly identify what isn't working in that story. And so I think the biggest thing that I found, which is just a constant mistake, is that writers try to write extremely complicated stories, and every good story is simple. There are no good complicated stories. For a long time, I was hesitant to, like, take the full sort of leap into that, but there are no good complicated stories. Even if you look at something that you think is complicated, like Inception. Inception is about one character, implanting an idea in this other character. That's the whole really. And so no one throws a lot of stuff at you, but that's the central idea. And so good stories, are very simple. And not to say that no one has fantastic stories as much as he does concepts as much, but that's a whole nother thing. The point is simplicity was big. Understanding that and just clear mistakes. So like people are always like, what are they? How are they messing up? What's the issue?" It's like they're making the same mistakes amateur writers are, which is the protagonist doesn't have a clear want or doesn't actually take clear action, or it's not clear what the goals of the characters are, or there's no sort of centralized real conflict on the moral or ethical or philosophical level of the story. It's just sort of the action hero hitting the beats, and that's just again and again that sort of thing. So writers are constantly looking for the mistake that's just going to wow them. Oh, I didn't think that that was the mistake I was making. It's never coming. What it is that you are just missing one of the simple things. It's always that you're missing one of the simple.
Why do you think people feel the need to have a complicated story?
I think it's just the nature of how human beings think. So, Einstein is credited to have said, "If you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it." What is he saying? What he's saying is that the core concepts of anything are very clear and very simple, and that when you are trying to solve problems or when you're trying to make progress in something, you are always coming to the clearest, most foundational elements of that thing. That could be math, that could be, physics, that could be writing a story. And what happens is rather than clearing our minds, our minds are muddled, and so what we do is muddled. And so we have to, it's this kind of loop of understanding that the things that you create are at their best when they're simple and focused and are focused on sort of one idea. And then you realize that your mind should work the same way. That clarity of thought helps you in the external things that you do, which is also what story is. You making having a thought, having a belief, and taking an action into the world to then see the feedback of the world to then have an understanding of how that impacts what you think.
And so for the person listening to this, if they want to know more about your lessons, you did put up a video on this, so I'll make sure maybe I'll link in the show notes down below so people want to go direct to that. But there's one in the there's 2 points, I guess, in that video that are kind of, I'm going to connect here with this question. So one of your lessons from reading unproduced screenplays was that your screenplay shouldn't start getting interesting at page 70. That was one of them. But you had another one. So a lot of people probably hear that and be like, okay, well, I need to be shocking with my screenplay right away. But there's also a difference, you said, between shock value and good writing. So how do you kind of balance those two things with wanting to make sure your screenplay isn't a snooze fest until over the hour mark, but also not wanting to just throw shock value in there to try and shock the reader?
Mhm. So when we're looking at that, we have to ask ourselves, what is shock value? What do we mean when we say shock value? What do we mean when we say interesting at page 7, right? One of the big things I'm really big on is having a clear definition of what we're talking about when we talk about elements of story. So we have to ask ourselves, what makes an interesting screenplay? And what is interesting? And what happens is, what I've found is that you have to sort of leave screenwriting, novels, these mediums, and you have to come in to say, okay, what is a story really? Why do stories exist as an element of human consciousness? Why do we tell each other stories? Why are they valuable? They're entertaining, yes, and you can have a story that is solely entertaining, and those are fun, and I enjoy those. But why do stories exist as a part of our human consciousness? The reason that they do is that they are essentially symbols of philosophical lessons. So they are a philosophical lesson and a symbol that you can understand. So what we do, I think, are like language is not an accurate way to communicate ideas to each other, right? Like some of the things that we've built up are ways, methods of communication. Really, what we're doing is trying to transfer symbols from one person to the other. So what a story is a large symbol of a concept, of one concept, ideally, that you can transfer to somebody else. That ideally gives them a understanding of some sort of metaphysical, philosophical, moral, ethical concept, and allows them to see it in a different light. So, taking all of that, now we can come back to a screenplay. Okay, so why is a screenplay not interesting up until page 70? Or how do we create an interesting story without shock value? It's very simple. What we do is we create a screenplay, we create a story based upon a philosophical conflict. So what does that mean? A philosophical conflict is two ideas or more, but mainly two ideas in conflict with each other about what is sort of the best way to think and view life and live. So, for an example, let's take Whiplash, which is an example I've talked about a lot. There's my Whiplash right there. Whiplash is a philosophical conflict around the pursuit of greatness and the sacrifices that it can take, or a normal life and the value that there is in living a normal life and being a person that won't be remembered. And so, what you see in that film is ultimately a character who's struggling to figure out what is the best way to live. What is the best way to live a meaningful life? What is the most valuable thing to do? And their struggle is the pro of greatness and the con of the level of sacrifice it requires versus the pro of the value and enjoyment in a normal life versus the cons of not being remembered and not making an impact on a larger society, right? And the entire film is based around that idea. You can look at a lot of different stories like this. For those listening, if you want to see a ton of examples of me talking about this, my YouTube channel is the place to find a myriad of me looking at this very simple concept in a ton of different. And so that's why when we're asking what, it's not shock value, it's you want to begin a story, and as soon as possible, the audience should have an understanding of the dilemma that's taking place, morally, ethically, philosophically. When we start the story of Whiplash. Quickly, the opening scene is we dolly into a drummer playing drums intensely. He's trying to learn. He's clearly frustrated. He's trying to get it right. A teacher comes in, critiques him, and leaves, and we see that he wants to get this right. And this is the baseline of this side of the philosophical conflict. We have a character trying to pursue this great thing. Then, very quickly, we see this character with his father, who is the symbol of the normal life, or in the character's mind, the symbol of mediocrity. And we see that side of it. And so now we start to very quickly within the story, within the first 10 to 15 pages, we have an understanding of the philosophy and the philosophical dilemma that's taking place. And that is how you make your story interesting from the beginning. Because how do you create empathy, right? This is something that writers are constantly struggling with. You don't create empathy for characters by making them likable. You create empathy for characters by making it clear what they believe and why they believe what they believe and their real struggle on figuring out what to do. So even characters like Frank Underwood in House of Cards. He's a despicable character, but we have empathy for him, or we follow him, or we're interested to see what he does next because we have an understanding of his life philosophy, we have an understanding of what he values, and that is enough to get us to follow where he goes next.
I'm curious how your relationship with watching movies has changed since becoming a screenwriter and since doing the YouTube channel. I mean, like, obviously, I know Whiplash is one of your favorite movies, so you've watched it countless times, but can you just sit down and kind of turn your brain off and enjoy a movie now? Or are you always in kind of a state of analyzing what they're doing and how they're doing it all the time?
I I can sit down and turn my brain off. Well, here's the thing. So I can't turn my brain off. What I can do is be fully integrated in a story that is good. So, for example, one of my favorite movies is Wind River by Taylor Sheridan. I love that, especially that trilogy: Sicario, Hell or High Water, and Wind River, that were Taylor Sheridan's kind of frontier films. Those were movies that I watched later on, having a lot of these ideas in my head and about them. But I was very, very fully in his story because his stories, and you can even listen to him in interviews talk about this very idea, is what he's exploring is this idea of this sort of lost element of our society that still exists, which is like this weird element of the frontier world and the struggle of sort of modernity in the world we live in now versus this culture that people are kind of holding on to, and the conflict between these cultures essentially living together. Um, and so when a movie is just doing what it needs to, I can be in that film. I think the second that I realize it's not, usually what will happen is I will be in the film, and then there will be a moment where I have an awareness that I am now analyzing it. And that usually happens because the film is not hitting that engagement. It's not creating the empathy for characters. It doesn't have that philosophical content. And that's why I can have that happen.
Hey, that's interesting. So it's as soon as you realize there's a lesson to be taken because they did something wrong is once you start analyzing it.
Yes.
And kind of jumping back to YouTube channel now. So you mentioned phase one was 0 to 1,000. Phase two was about 1,000, 2,000 to 15, 17,000. And 17,000, you had a fundamental shift to your channel, which really kind of helped with that hockey stick curve growth, right? Can you share what that change was and why you made it?
Absolutely. So the change was very, very simple. The change was, rather than making videos about random things I wanted to talk about, I made videos only on screenwriting, and I made videos that were as helpful as humanly possible to screenwriters that were stuck where I was stuck beforehand. So that was the only shift. I didn't. I have never been good at keywords. I've never been good at SEO on my channel. I've never been good at those elements. What I did well was I did my best to create videos that people genuinely and really found actual practical value from, that they weren't getting from the books they were reading or the professors they were listening to. And that is really what shot my channel growth upward.
And that was around 2019, right?
Yes.
And so, kind of with that in mind, I absolutely love. So, I went back through your Instagram. Like I said, you only posted two photos in 2019. One was on January 1st, and it read, 2019 will be the liftoff. Keep an eye out. And then your second post, December 31st, and it said, 2019 has been the best year of my life so far. And I just love how you bookended your Instagram with just two posts. And then you called it right at the beginning of the year that it was going to be a big year. And it was. You went from whatever, I think you hit, it was not quite 100K, but just after the turn of the year is when you finally hit 100K. So bring back to, I think it was March 29th, 2016, where you're having those thoughts of how cool it'd be to hit this number, this number. How cool did it actually feel when you got that plaque in the mail and you got your YouTube plaque?
It it was weird because it really, I mean, it was cool, but it didn't really feel like much. Like, surprisingly, I mean, like, honestly, I got all of the feeling of hitting it when I was at 200 subscribers trying to get this thing off the ground, fantasizing about how cool it would be to have a successful YouTube channel. And then when it came, I was just kind of like, all right, on to the next thing. And I think that, I think there, in a way, the sort of the vision of it helped carry me through times when I needed to be pushing. And then at the same time, I think part of that was me not being able to enjoy the process and be in the moment of the work and the growth. And that's something I'm trying to do more so now, which is just like, rather than constantly being focused on what am I building the next 6 months from now? What am I building the next year from now? What am I doing when I'm 30? Which, that's the thing too, is I focus so much on like what I'm trying to build by the time I'm 30, that I can lose sight of the value of things that I am able to do right now, and the people that I'm able to help right now, and the relationships that I've been able to create with people in course, and people that I've worked with one on one. And so I think that, ideally, if I ever hit a million, it would be more of a, wow, this is crazy, but I don't know. Like, I would love to keep moving and keep pushing, but we'll just kind of see what happens. I really think I needed the motivation of like 100K and above when I was starting. And then when I was there, I didn't need that anymore. Like, I so I needed what I needed at the time to keep moving forward. And honestly, whatever I needed then to keep pushing forward was fine, because that was the most difficult part of it. Going from 0 to 1,000, just brutal.
I'm curious why 30. I believe you and I had the same age. I believe you were born in 97 as well. And so why 30? Is it something along the lines of like, holy shit, like I'm not young anymore once I hit 30? Cause like I'm trying, and as I get older, I'm starting to hear people talk about how cool being in your 30s actually is. So I'm curious for you, why is 30 the number you settled on? Is it just because it's the next decade, or what is the reason behind that?
I think it's a couple things. I mean, I think part of it is just kind of the benchmark of it, like the decade of your 20s being time where you have this energy, and you can have this optimism too, and you can have all these things to push growth. Um so I think part of it's that. I think part of it is just kind of having, the deadline to say, this is the thing I want to have built by now. And I think also part of it is the idea of the when you do things when you're young, the younger you do things, the more you can be like, oh, look at me, like how prodigious I ended up being, and this sort of thing, like. And I think whether that's ego, or whether that's just something you need to keep pushing. Like, I don't know. Um, like, my vision is to build a production company. I wanna My vision is to, do like what happened previously in old Hollywood, in the sense of being a creative producer that has a team of screenwriters where they're working on their projects, and I can be there to not just tell them that we need this because this demographic of our audience wants this, but be able to say, okay, well, like, what is the core dilemma in this story, and how are you serving that, and at the same time taking away of some of the stress that a lot of writers have, which is the constant, like, in inconsistency of work. And that would be my vision. Um, and we'll see if that ends up happening, but
Do you know what you're going to call your production company already?
probably practical production.
That's a perfect segue to your course. So, which is interesting because you want to essentially make not necessarily life easier for writers, but you want to be there to help them along the journey. That's kind of your long term goal, and you're finding ways to do that now with your course with practical screenwriting. Which, if anyone wants to check it out, practicalscreenwriting.com. And I believe you launched that in 2019 as well. So, as your channel is starting to pick up steam, and I'm curious. So now is that today in 2021? Is that kind of the full time income, or is that just supplementing the full time income?
So that is what I'm doing right now. That is my income. And what I have found is that in regards to production company and like YouTube and all this sorts of things, is that like I love screenwriting and I love storytelling. And one of the biggest gaps that I see is screenwriters don't know how to make money and producers don't know how to make story. And I want to be someone who can make money and have an understanding of how to use capital and at the same time have a very clear understanding of storytelling. So I think like my goal is to be a screenwriter and have a career writing my own stories, but I also see a vision where I am helping writers in sort of this tank of this incubator essentially of this production company where we are building stories and I'm helping them stay on track with it, helping them keep clarity and helping them talk about the particular, philosophy that they want to discuss in their story and making sure that they are not getting lost in their concept, making sure that they're not getting lost in budget constraints, but also finding a way to work within that and having, the pragmatic side of things cost money and people must watch these things and it has to make money and I have a core belief that ultimately people want good stories, and I feel like, that's been proven again and again, seeing, writers that didn't really have a name behind them, like Damien Chazelle when he created Whiplash or Taylor Sheridan when he did his Frontier series. Like, at the time, they weren't names, but they had great things to say, and they had great screenplays, and they became successes because of that, and you know, my belief is that if you are actually creating great stories, you can create these original stories and, you know, turn a profit. And that is my long term vision. Um, we'll see if it happens.
No, for sure. I love that. I love that that's the vision. And with the course specifically, though, it's not necessarily helping people figure out how to tell their story better. It's helping them create kind of the habits and routines so they can be consistent and finish their story, right?
So it does two main things. So on my YouTube channel, if you are looking for story theory, basic fundamentals of storytelling, my YouTube channel is the place to go. That's where I'm going to talk to you about what a character is, how to build one, and how to, write it within a structure. And so within my course, I'm doing two things. And the reason I call it the practical screenwriting course is now that you've learned theory, it's time to do some work and it's time to fix that work. So the first half of the course is about how to get your script finished, right? If you are struggling to finish your first screenplay, or if you want to just work on building a consistent routine and have an understanding of what you're doing in a first draft, because your first draft is not the end of your story. And if you continue to think about your first draft as the finished draft, that's how people get slowed down because they're worried that it's not right again and again. They're worried, they're worried, they're worried, and they slow down. So that's the first thing it helps you do. It helps you get it onto the page. The second half is the systematic rewriting section. So in that, I'm saying, okay, let's take a look at this first draft, and it is going to be a mess. Just like I talked about, we don't think clearly. Our brains are cluttered, therefore our writing is cluttered. So in systematic rewriting, I am helping you organize your story. And rather than fixing scenes or these sorts of things, I'm saying, okay, let's decide what is the most important part of your story. Then what is the second most important and the third most important. And when you organize your story at this sort of level, you realize, okay, this is the most important thing. This has to get nailed down first before I do this, before I do this, before I do this. And so it's a way of clearly focusing on the right elements of your story and getting them correct so that you can go back and rewrite and slowly get this draft into a finished screenplay.
I want to be careful with my questions here because I don't want to ask anything that's going to lead to you telling me something that's in the course that's gives. So if I ask anything that's like crossing a line or anything, please let me know. But when it comes to, I don't want to know about how to set the habits because that's obviously what the course is about. But what's stopping people from building those habits?
Well, I think what stops people from there's a couple of things because there's an element of what stops people from finishing their script, and there's an element of what stops people from building habits. So, in regards to the habits, people, I think, don't have a true reason why they're doing what they're doing, right? So, I think a lot of people, they get into screenwriting because they watched the Nolan movie and they thought it was cool. And so then they try to write a script and then they wonder why they get 20 pages into it and then stop. And that's because they have no idea why they really want to be a writer. And then, so that's just sort of, again, the basic concept of defining why you want to do something. Even if you go to the gym, right? You get a personal trainer at the gym and they're going to ask you, why do you want to lose 20 pounds or why do you want to put on 10 pounds of muscle or whatever? Because if you don't have a reason to be there, you're going to flake when you don't feel like it. And so then on the first draft side, people don't finish their first draft. A lot of it is because they refuse to rewrite, essentially. They want this first draft to be their final draft. And so here's what most writers do. Finish a draft, they go back through and they polish it. And maybe they change some scenes around. Maybe they, rewrite a couple things here. They fix some grammar, and then they call it done. That is not a rewrite. That is you feeling your way through a draft, hoping you understand what you're doing. You're not actually, you don't know if you're making your story better or not. You're just kind of hoping. And what really I think you have to understand is that your first draft is just about you getting a bad version of the story out. Because what happens is people stay stuck in their outlines forever and ever and ever. And what this creates is tons of gaps in their story. So every time, and this has happened for me every single time, and I have friends in LA. There's a guy that I know who's trying to get funding for his film right now, who said the same thing, that outlines always look perfect, and then you get into your draft and you realize what is wrong here. Like, why? I thought I had this perfectly beat it out. Why isn't this working? Even down to scene by scene outlines. Like people outline all the way down to their scenes, and then they get to the story and they're like, wait a minute, why doesn't it work? That is because outlines allow you to lie to yourself. You must write an outline quick and start the draft. You don't actually know where the problems are until you write your draft. So what happens is people write their draft and then go, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do in my second act. I didn't have an ending. I got stuck on page 10 because I was missing 3 scenes. I had no idea what to do. It's like, yes, now we can finally get started on your learning process as a writer.
No, 100%. I think kind of back to the outline thing because I outline everything. I outline the podcast. I outline when I write. And for me, it's I don't know the characters well enough to be able to outline the story. You know what I mean? I felt like every time I've started writing, it's once I understand the character and I get to where I get to the outline and I see what scene I have next, I'm like, I know the character's not going to do that. And so to your point, like one of the things I tried my best to is to do the bad writing. Is I just went I tried to write without stopping, obviously taking breaks and stuff, but like just getting from the beginning to the end of the story and then going back from there and really kind of just tearing it all down and building it back up again. um, and I'm curious too, I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, but is around creativity and people having an idea in their head, like you said, their magnum opus. They think this is going to be their magnum opus, but once they put it on the page, it's not that. And so do you think it's part of the problem is people's taste of what that is different from their ability? Do you think that's part of the problem as well? Is their kind of their expectations or what they anticipate themselves being able to do is not actually what they're capable of doing?
So, for individuals with a high taste, yes, what happens is they write 20 pages and they hate it and they hate themselves and they hate writing and they can't believe that they are so bad at this. and they get stuck, right? Because they have a good understanding of what is quality and their writing is not that. So that's one of the problems. The other issue is when you don't have that level of taste, people finish their first draft, do one polish and on with script formatting and fix a couple grammatical areas, and then wonder why they don't have their magnum opus and why everybody doesn't think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So ideally, you want to have good taste from the beginning. But if you are somebody who finishes a first draft, does a quick polish, and you genuinely believe that story is good, you don't have good taste yet. And so that is honestly, in my view, a bigger problem. Because if you have the taste just innate, fantastic. Now you just need to get through accepting that it takes time to get good. And that's a lot easier because you are already post the awareness. You are aware that your writing isn't good. Somebody who doesn't have the taste yet isn't aware of the initial problem. And that's the worst place to be.
And I think at the end of the day, like the hardest part is just getting in the chair and writing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's just at the end of the day, it's sitting down and putting words on a page. And again, if this is part of the course, please, I'll edit this whole thing out. But what are some of your ways to work around writer's block?
Sure. So I like outlines. I like I so and also one of the things, and this is something I encourage people to do in my course, is I was just a little freebie, which is that like I tell people initially, outline heavily. If you haven't written a story yet, outline heavily. You want to do a scene by scene outline? Great, do it because you don't know what your writing process is yet. So once you've written 3 or 4 scripts, you can say, "Oh, you know what? I like to kind of outline like this," or "I don't like to write an outline. I like to write up till page 50 and then maybe fix something." You can experiment and play and do all that. But what happens in the beginning is people have either a bit of an outline or they spend so much time in their outline, and what I say is have an outline because what an outline does is when you get stuck at page 30, it at least gives you something to write to, right? So it gives you sort of anchor points, right? Like monkey bars that you can kind of swing one place to the other because you need that when you're frustrated. And so when you've never done it before, you're going to be frustrated. So it allows you to relax. And I think part of it too is like when you're writing that story, especially if you have an outline in the beginning, focus on the scene that you're writing right now. Like one of the things that I have done again and again that has really slowed my writing is I'm always saying it's like, what about 20 pages from now? How's that going to fit? What am I going to do at the end of the story? It's like, write the scene that's in front of you because that is never going to come if you can't get this scene out that's right in front of you. So focus on this scene and then write the next one. And write the next one after that. The next one after
How do you know when your screenplay is done? Quote unquote. Like obviously you can go back to it forever, but how do you know when it's time to say this is finished as well as I can make it right now and to move on to the next screenplay?
that. So couple things. Then okay, let's look at this. I believe there's two main types of stories, two main or not types of stories, excuse me, types of movies. So there is the roller coaster movie. This could be a comedy or a thriller or a horror, and it could be other genres or whatever. But like a roller coaster movie is one that is here for the ride, here for the entertainment value, and not here to bring a larger theme, right? Um, and so then you have the other side, which are films that can also be fun and entertaining and that sort of thing, but are very much focused around a centralized theme, centralized idea. And thrillers and comedies and horrors can be both. You can also have dramas and but like it kind of goes both ways. But you have to first define whether or not like what kind of story you're writing. I think that's extremely important because a lot of people get stuck there. And so then once you have that, then let's look at the roller coaster type kind of movie first. Then you need to say, okay, when this film really does have the consistent push that you can really feel that momentum, people that read it feel the momentum. It has the consistent reveals. It doesn't lose pace in the second act. Right? Like what you're doing making the roller coaster movie is really trying to as much as possible paint by the numbers of what makes a movie feel fast paced, feel strong, and feel good momentum. So And these can be fantastic. So, if you're writing a comedy, it's like making sure that story is not lulling, and you have continued jokes, this sort of thing. Looking at something like I haven't watched it in a while, so maybe it does have a philosophical content I don't remember, but the movie Game Night. I don't know if you've seen it. Fantastic film. Yeah, a fantastic movie. I love it. And the reason it works is the pace is very strong. It has these constant reveals, and it's constantly making jokes. It's a fun roller coaster movie. 10 Cloverfield Lane, another example of a fun roller coaster movie. Contained thriller in this bunker. Reveal, reveal, reveal. The protagonist, she is figuring out the puzzle of what's going on. Fun roller coaster, right? So when you have that momentum, that's how you know when it's done. It's not done when it doesn't. When you just are like, okay. Or if you're bored at page 60, it's just about that. It's just, are you bored or not? Now we can come to philosophical conflict based films, right? Stories that are here with a theme, stories that are impactful. It's just about how clearly are you communicating that theme, and do you feel it when you read it? Is it focused? Do people who read that story, if they say what the story is about back to you, if that's clear, then you might be, pretty close. This sort of thing. Like I don't really believe that strong movies are ambiguous in the sense of what they're meaning. Like Whiplash is not ambiguous in what it is talking about. There can be different points of view on what the best move forward is within the philosophy of the film, but what the film is actually discussing is very clear. So you want that clarity in a reader of your story. You want them to be able to say, this story is about this thing. And you're like, correct. It is about that. And so a great way would be if people are actually having a discussion about the theme of the film or of the script after they've read it. That's a great way to know you might be on the right track. So, just like art forms, I think that it can sometimes be hard to say, when is this done? And there's absolutely things that can be fixed. But I think when you're hitting when the main things are hitting, that's how you know you're pretty close.
Okay. And kind of jumping around the whole writing process here a little bit. For you personally, where do you go, or what does your process look like for generating ideas for screenplays?
It can be a couple different things. I have no system of idea generation that is like consistent. So, and I don't think it needs to be. So, for example, one story I wrote is a thriller, and it's a contained thriller. And essentially, the way I thought of it was just um, I was in this particular space, uh, and I was just like, oh wow, what a interesting place to have a contained thriller story, and that's the basic of the idea. I was in the setting in real life, and I was like, okay, this could be really interesting. Write a movie about it. Or there's I have thought about a theme or an element of a something that's happened in my life that I want to, um, bring into a story, and then I can start with a theme and then pick the rest of it, pick what my characters and genre and concept are going to be after. That's a way to do it. Sometimes I've listened to a particular piece of music and thought, oh, it would be cool in this scene, and then built a movie around that particular scene. So I think a lot of that um, it just kind of starts where it starts. And then I think what happens is, once you have kind of the initial growth of it, you then come and say, all right, let's go and look at what the important parts of the story are. If I have a scene, now we can talk about, okay, well, what would potentially be characters in this? What would be a philosophical conflict for this? And how would that look like? What would be the momentum? And you can just kind of build from whatever point that you enter into it.
And so when you're starting, what do you kind of focus? 'Cause I know different writers focus on different things in the beginning. This is what they prioritize. Do you focus on the structure? Are you all about the characters? Like, kind of what's your priority when you're starting to kind of really build this idea out?
The philosophical conflict. So, what is the theme of this story? Because that's the purpose, right? And if you watch my video, the purpose of conflict, you can see me talk about this. Like the reason stories exist is because of They are a way for us to symbolize philosophies in conflict with one another and create this sort of human element of figuring out what to do and what is the best way to live. So the reason that philosophy books are not as good as stories is that theoretical philosophy is very different from a character having to make real decisions in their world about what is the best thing to do in whatever their situation. That is something that's more human to us. We are always attaching theory to reality, and this is part of the reason that a lot of screenwriting has been um, there's been a reaction against a lot of the way that screenwriting has been taught. People get furious about, oh, this is paint by numbers, this is formulaic, it's this, it's that. Why? Because they are detaching the theory from how we actually learn. And it's interesting that a story allows a character to essentially move through a theoretical idea in the way that human beings do learn. Or so it's philosophical beliefs creates external actions, creates the story, creates the reaction against those external actions, in that that is kind of the loop of the story. The same that is the same way that we learn.
How long does it normally take you from once you have the idea to finalizing your screenplay?
It can take a while. I mean, like it just again, now we're coming back to like what is finished. So from idea to first draft could be you know and anywhere as low as 2 days if you watch my 48-hour screenplay video, or it can be as long as like a year or more. And so I think the focus would be to shorten that time period as much as possible. I think especially if you're starting out, because what you're doing in the beginning is getting used to the skill, right? So the what's frustrating about the beginning of storytelling for so many writers who are artists is that they want to immediately create Michelangelo's David, and but they need to learn about how sculpting perspective works first. So you are building a skill set in your first stories, which is why you should write fast and look at your problems quick. So the short answer would be it can be kind of all over the place. It depends on what you're writing, and it depends on if you're talking about a first draft or there's a story I've written now that I think I'm on draft 8. I think 4 of those were a page 0 rewrite. So it can be a lot.
How do you know when it's time to just scrap it and start from page 0 again? Like how? Because that's there's a lot of sunken time into that screenplay up to that point. So with that one where you've done it 4 times, like how do you know when you're just at the point where you're lost in the screenplay or it's time to just start from scratch?
Ironically, I think it's harder to figure out when you're writing a roller coaster story versus when you're writing a story based on your theme. I think when you're writing a story based upon a theme, philosophical conflict, the simple answer is to go back to your philosophical conflict and say, okay, do I need to fully come at this at a totally different way? Or is there a way that I need to just to adjust some things here so that my story becomes clear and focused and about this central theme? So that question becomes easier. It actually becomes more difficult when you're trying to write something that is just a fun story or just an entertaining story. Because now you're saying, okay, does this concept work? Does the reveals work? Is this the best way to, you're more in the ocean on it. Like you're more kind of just out there. So I would say that would be my answer. I think it's harder for a story based on central themes is very clear. You go back to that and you see if it's working or not. If it's not working, you change it. On sort of movies that are only thrilling, only roller coasters, only entertaining, it's harder to know. Like even for me, it's been harder to know. There's a producer that read a thriller of mine that's just a roller coaster story, and I submitted it, and he was like, "This is really not what I thought." And I thought we were not on the same page, or I thought we were on the same page. We weren't, and I was like, "That's frustrating." And so I went and did a page 0 rewrite, and that next story ended up being dramatically better. So it ended up being good, but I needed somebody else to tell me this wasn't working, and so it honestly is more difficult the less that you have that theme. And people like to stay away from theme. They think it's pushy or they think it's overbearing or forceful. But in reality, it becomes the engine of your story.
Talk to me about taking in feedback because creativity is so subjective. So someone might have read that first screenplay, like you said, you guys were misaligned, but someone else might have read it and loved it. So how do you know what feedback to take in? How do you process the feedback? Because obviously some people will be like, they'll try to tell you how to fix a problem when really they just need to tell you what's wrong and you have to figure that out. But how do you figure out what feedback to take in and what not to, essentially?
So there's a couple layers to that. I think one is that I don't believe creativity is subjective. Like, I think that, like, you know, I am of the belief that there is, I mean, this, it's so much, right? I think now we're getting into the question of what is good art? What is valuable art? What is these sorts of things? One of the definitions that I would give, and this is, potentially controversial, is the fact that, like, I do think good art has focus and has intention. Um, and I think that what we see a lot of times in more modern art is a lack of focus or lack of attention. And that, to me, creates objectively worse art. Now, that can be, I that's of course a blanket statement that there's a million layers into that I'm not. But what I would say is that if you were trying to create Michelangelo's David, there is an objective element to whether or not that is working. So when you have a goal, when you have a vision for the thing that you're trying to create, when you have a lot of writers talk about having something to say. What that means is a central theme and a philosophical conflict. When you have a central theme and a philosophical conflict and a vision for the purpose of this story, you have now created objectivity because this is objectively serving that vision or objectively not. And so through that, we can now have a discussion about what is the actual right and wrong choice. And I think that's valuable because I think that as long as creativity remains subjective in whatever field you're in, it's hard to build the skill set side of it. So, and this is, you can kind of come back into and look at some elements of modern art. The part of the joke of modern art is people say, I could make that, right? And they say that because of that, it's not art and this sort of thing. So why do people think that? Well, part of it is there is, in my view, a level of skill required in art. And of course, I'm willing to have a longer discussion about this if somebody's angry listening to this right now. But because when you have an objective goal for this piece of art, it then requires skill set to bring it about. It then requires skill set to create that vision. Michelangelo, the creative part of Michelangelo creating the David statue is in his mind. I want to create this statue. I want it to be this symbol of beauty and strength and this sort of thing. But him actually building that statue, well, that's problem solving and skill set. That's his understanding of geometry. That's his understanding of uh, uh, using a sculpting tool. That's his understanding of perspective. And those are objective elements within his skill set. And so I think that is required, I think, to grow. I talk a bit about this in the course, but there are feedback is always contextual. So I think, first and foremost, you have to understand who you're listening to and what their frame is when you are taking in a particular piece of feedback. So, for example, um, like let's say you are on like a first or second draft of a story and you show that to a fellow writer friend of yours. Well, that writer friend is going to be able to come in with the context that you're looking at a second draft and that this is a work in progress. And they can come in and ask you, what are you trying to do with the story? What is your focus? And they can also have a more educated discussion with you about, is this particular turning point working? Is this character growth happening in the way that you want it to? Um, and so there's context to that. And then I think you look at, let's say you have more of a nearer to finished draft and you show that to somebody who is more of an audience member, somebody that doesn't have knowledge about the particular skill set of screenwriting, then their feedback may be more broad based or more feelings based, or they're tossing ideas at you And a lot more of that has to be interpreted, right? You have to say, okay, what is my intention and what does it seem like they're getting? And finding, somebody may give you some sort of like, what if you did this? And that idea may be not what your story needs, but the fact that this seems like an issue makes you say, okay, I need to re-examine this particular part of my story. So I think a lot of it is contextual. And I think also a lot of it is understanding what your vision is. So writers will submit to a script coverage service, and that coverage service will then send them feedback like, well, what if the idea was this? And the writer goes, oh, I guess I'll write that. But they don't actually improve their story. They just shift ideas because they don't understand the vision for what they're trying to do. And so I think first and foremost, you have to have an understanding of what you're trying to write. And then in the early stages, if you're stuck, if you need feedback, finding other people that have the context of understanding a story and the purpose of it. And you can say, hey, this is the vision I'm trying to get to. Does this version, these elements of the story adhere to that vision or not? And can you help me get closer to that vision? Because a lot of people will throw ideas at you and not actually help you create the best version of your story in the sense of your vision for what the story should be.
I like that. I really like that. It's kind of understanding why you're writing the story to an extent. Is I like that a lot. I know we're at a time here, so I'm going to jump to my last two questions here that I have for you. First one being is how often do you look back on the whole journey to this point? Your days in film school, making some of those early shorts like Gone to where you are now, closing in on 200,000 subscribers. You're shopping screenplays around. You're writing. You have a course. Like, how often do you reflect on how crazy the journey's been up to this point?
Sometimes it's kind of weird. I think what I do is I spend too much time being critical of what I did wrong. So I think that for me, I think I've done a lot of things right, and I think I've helped a lot of people, and I think I've grown a lot, and I think I've had a lot of great lessons. And I think one of the things that I have to just sort of work on as a person is the fact that when I think about the past, sometimes I'm thinking about, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I messed up that way. I can't believe whatever, rather than saying like, wow, like look at how I got here and look at, the mistakes that were made, sure, but the progress made, even though things weren't done perfectly. And I think that it's funny that, that relates just so heavily to screenwriting itself too, which is like you're not supposed to look back at your first draft and hate it completely. You're supposed to say, yeah, like I started, I got something done, and then I adjust it, and like that's how we learn. But there's still the process of um, accepting your own mistakes, like even when you are doing something well and having success and heading in the right direction. So I think that's my biggest thing. I think I'm very critical of myself, which in certain ways has been very helpful for me. I think you need a level of criticism to be able to move forward and grow, but you also need to be able to be where you are and also have an understanding of the biggest thing that you can do really in my uh, belief is to move forward no matter what. You keep moving forward, and as long as you are growing and learning and understanding the mistakes you made, I think you're going to be okay. There's a quote I have on my board right here, which is just all you got to do is not stop, which I really believe in. Like, it's not about always hustling. It's not always about feeling motivated, crushing it, and doing everything right. It's just keep moving. As long as you keep moving, you are going to get better.
All you got to do is not stop. I really like that. I like that a lot. My final question for you is, and I ask this at the end of every single podcast. So I like to flip the script a little bit with this one. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. Pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question. You'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Will Bitcoin hit 200K by December? I'm just kidding. Although I would love to know if that ends up happening. Um, let's see. I mean, there's so many things to ask, right? Um, Is God real? I think is up there. Uh, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest question I would ask is just, is God real? I think just that would be the one I would ask, because I think that's the most sort of metaphysical, uh, like, if we could know that, I think it would really, really change some things, either one way or the other. If we knew for sure one way or the other, it would really change some things around. Um, Honestly, I don't know. I mean, maybe that. I don't know. I mean, yeah, probably, is God real? That's my
All right.
question.
Fair enough. It's a good question. It's a good question, man. And I want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate you for a number of reasons. Obviously, I appreciate all the free content you put out on YouTube. It's been beneficial to me on my journey. I appreciate your time for coming on the show. I appreciate two things about the way you conduct yourself in the interview too. Is one, you're very thoughtful with your answers. It's like you're not jumping to answer as soon as I finish my question. Like you take time to genuinely think about your answer. And I do appreciate that about you. And the other thing too that I really appreciate is as someone who listens to podcasts that talks about screenwriting and movies, you're able to talk about movies in a podcast and not spoil any of it, because it's the worst when I like listen to a podcast about like The Social Network, but then they spoil the ending of The Departed in it because somehow they connect the two. And you know what I mean? Like I just hate when things like that happen in a podcast. So I appreciate your ability to do that, to talk about movies in a meaningful way without giving away any of the endings. But anyways, man, thank you so much for taking time to come on the podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Like anything and everything you got right now.
So, best place to find me is youtube.com/Tyler Mowery. That's TYLERMOWERY. That's where you're going to find, my videos and everything. If you want to learn about screenwriting, if you're interested in screenwriting, I would head over to my channel and I would look at my playlists and look at the fundamentals of screenwriting playlist. So, that is a series of videos I did where you can go through and get an understanding of characters, structure, philosophical conflict, midpoints, uh, yeah, climaxes, all of the huge questions about getting started on a script. That's where you can find them. And then, from there, you can check out my other videos.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you once again. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below as well, so you can find it. I'll make sure practical screenwriting is linked down there as well. But thank you once again for taking time to be on the podcast, and thank you to everybody for listening. Whether you listen the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces, I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor: go and subscribe to Tyler's channel. Like I said, he's closing in on 200,000, so if we can help him get closer to that, that would be amazing. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. Like I said, if you'd like to follow me, I'm everywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.